issue and important sector. Mr. President, I didn't go in detail as regards to some of the areas that the Farm Labor Program will be targeting. We'll be targeting avocados, cocoa, nutmeg, and soursop. So these are the primary crops that are going to be targeted in that program. As relates to the issue of identifying the persons who are in need, that process has been done through our extension farmers in consultation with our stakeholders. I do know that we have a registration for farmers, and so that there is due diligence in that initiative. I can assure you there is due diligence. If there are any issues that your community, Farmers Association may be aware of, please bring it to our attention, and we are going to address it speedily. Thank you very much.
Simon, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have a lot of ground to cover in my presentation, so I hope you'll be as generous with me as you were with my colleagues. I would like to take advantage of this opportunity as the first time speaking on the new Ministry of Climate Resilience, Environment, Forestry, Fisheries, Disaster Management and Information to apprise this House of the rationale for the establishment of this new ministry. And in addition to that, I would like to speak on some matters coming out from the Ministry of Finance with the recently published Fiscal Responsibility Oversight Committee report. So those are the two areas I would wish to cover. So with regard to the Ministry of Climate Resilience, the rationale for the establishment of this critical ministry is so that we, as a government, as a country, could take a far more strategic approach to facing the challenges of climate change, whether that is how we adapt, how we build resilience into all that we do in terms of our national development, in terms of our country, or how do we mitigate against the causes, even though as a small island developing state, our contribution to climate change is negligible. However, we face the dire consequences of those actions, whether it's sea level rise, whether it's hurricanes, whether it's drought, flood, etc. But the issue and the area of climate resilience, how we adapt to this change in environment, enables us to prepare better for extreme climatic shocks, how to withstand those shocks far better, and then how we recover. We recover the damage incurred, managed less, and our ability to move forward, recover far faster. The other area is the stewardship, better stewardship of our natural resources, having fisheries, forestry, environment under one umbrella. In addition to climate resilience, the information component in terms of public education allows for a more comprehensive approach to this ridge to reef concept. This concept that what we do on land affects what happens in our oceans, and what happens in our oceans affects what happens on land. And right now, Mr. President, there is significant international attention on the area of climate resilience, and there are significant international resources available through various funding agencies, whether it's the Green Climate Fund, the largest of the climate financing entities, or the Adaptation Fund, the Global Environment Facility, bilateral arrangements through foreign affairs or other sources. And there is a narrow window of opportunity, I believe, for small island developing states. So the faster that we can coalesce our resources, our efforts in accessing and applying those resources to our national development agenda, the better. And in terms of the progressiveness of our Prime Minister, of this administration, The Ministry of Climate Resilience is the first of its kind within the region, and we've seen others. Dominica has established a similar ministry. Others are following also. So with regard to the construct of this extremely large, extremely complex ministry, there are three ministers. Honorable Alvin Dabrio, who has special responsibility for forestry and fisheries, with myself with overall responsibility. One of the key mandates of this ministry is resource mobilization. So how do we tap into the resources that are available, and the development of a pipeline of bankable bankable projects. And these are based on our various policy areas, whether it's a national adaptation plan, the national determined contributions which speak to adaptation, speak to mitigation, or our national biodiversity strategy and action plan. Whether it is other areas of national development, climate resilience is a cross-cutting function. And it speaks to our infrastructure, it speaks to tourism, it speaks to education, it speaks to health, housing, etc. And my colleagues, Senator Garraway, spoke to some of those in his presentation. Mr. President, there have already been successes within the ministry. In the lead up to the establishment of the ministry, there were already a number of projects that were in that pipeline, the most significant of which is a water resilience project with NAWASA. Through the Green Climate Fund, the GCRUISE project, which is a $125 million EC dollar project, which will help transform our water sector and build resilience, whether it's how we collect water, whether it's how we store it, whether how we distribute it across the country. A second project is to establish St. George's as the first climate resilient city within the region. And we have support to prepare the concepts behind that, $600,000 US, to develop key interventions, whether it is sprint sewage for the south of the island, whether it is St. George's University, a key economic pillar, how we build resilience into that institution, our airport, our roads, an urban plan for the town, all within the context of building greater resilience. And Mr. President, with those projects, if we did not have a strategy, if we did not perform in terms of our fiscal responsibility, the international community, those that are providing us with the grants or the concessional loans to do these activities, would not be doing that if we weren't able to make the strides and the progress that we have over the past 5 years in terms of our fiscal stability. There are some other projects that we've recently signed up to. One is a grant-funded agreement with the Global Environment Fund. This is a $300,000 project, building, again, resilience into our watershed areas, and that's a project with 10 other islands. And then we recently signed another agreement, a $20 million grant project, together with Antigua and Dominica. Grenada's share from that will be $6 million US, and this is for us to provide us with enhanced direct access to the funds that are available within the Green Climate Fund. There will be a private sector revolving fund of $2 million, so for projects within the private sector, and it's intended that these will be loans to homeowners to build resilience into their properties. A $3 million grant to government for government projects, and $1 million project for to build capacity so that we can better gain access to the funds that are available. And finally, we're in discussions with UN Environment for the submission of an $800,000 US project to upscale an existing coral restoration project that we have ongoing here in Grenada. And once again, we would not be getting this level of traction if our fiscal discipline wasn't intact. Mr. President, it is a complex ministry, and work has been ongoing with the support of the World Bank to restructure the ministry so the synergies that exist between all of the components, whether it's information, disaster management, fisheries, forestry, environment, climate resilience, can be taken advantage of. And the focus of the ministry, which is resource mobilization, the focus will be on delivering those. Mr. President, on the environment front, I just want to touch on the issue of sargassum and the environmental crisis we face, not just here in Grenada, but throughout the region with the influx of sargassum on our shores. This is linked to climate change. We're seeing significant blooms of sargassum offshore, and with the changing currents through the warming of our seas, we're seeing these now coming ashore. And we have particular issues here in Grenada, right now in Soubise, in Marquis, and in Windward, in Carriacou, a serious influx of sargassum. To date, we have spent over $400,000 in cleaning those beaches, but as soon as we clean, it returns, and then we're subject to the variables of variability of the currents, whether it comes to us, whether it misses us. We have a budget for an additional $600,000 to continue that cleanup process between now and September. Satellite images show significant blooms are on their way to us and our neighbors. We're working with the OECS, with member states who are all suffering from exactly the same challenge, but to come up with longer-term solutions, whether it is equipment to help clear our beaches on shore that is sensitive to our beaches, whether it is equipment for offshore to try and collect the sargassum before it hits our shores. And then the final area is whether there is actually a commercial opportunity in this. There are a couple of entrepreneurs out of St. Lucia who are converting sargassum into liquid fertilizer and have access to the US market. So we are working with the member states through the OECS to see how that project can be upscaled and how that can be adopted on each of the islands, so we can turn what is a cost to us to an actual revenue stream. So, Mr. President, I'd now like to move on to the FROC report. So the 7 minutes, I think, would be appropriate, Mr. President. So, brevity, you will get it now. Mr. President, I wish to address two issues that have been raised in the recent Fiscal Responsibility Oversight Committee report on Grenada's 2017 fiscal performance. As a background, the committee is an independent committee established to monitor and report on Grenada's fiscal performance. And there are two areas of non-compliance that were identified within that report. The first is to do with public sector debt to GDP ratio. The second is public-private partnership contingent liabilities. The same two issues were flagged in last year's report on the 2016 performance, and discussions have taken place between the Ministry of Finance and the FROC committee members, but the same issues have been raised once again. So first of all, the debt to GDP ratio, there is a target that is set as a fiscal rule of 55% debt to GDP ratio, but there are no annual intermediate steps associated with that target. So it's a simple target of 55%. Are we there? Are we not there? The ECCB target is more specific. It is 60 to get our debt to GDP ratio down to 60% by 2030. And our current projection is that we will bring our debt to GDP ratio down to 55% by 2020, so within a 2-year period. However, Mr. President, the FROC's interpretation of the law is that without these intermediate steps, you're either at 55%, bearing in mind when we entered this Homegrown Structural Adjustment Program, the debt to GDP ratio was 108%. So 108% we've brought down to 65% and targeted to hit 55% by 2020. So considerable progress has been achieved. We have also explained to the FROC that there isn't a need for this intermediate target once the primary balance rule, which is the primary balance of 3.5% of GDP is exceeded. Once we achieve that, greater than 3.5%, then our debt trajectory continues to move in the right downward direction. The second point, the PPP contingent liability rule, the FROC's position, again, is that we are non-compliant because of the lack of information. When we started to be monitored from 2016, there have been no public-private partnerships. So their request for data on PPPs is actually irrelevant. We have none. We are in discussion with a number of state-owned enterprises, but there are no agreements in place. So not until that point is reached can information on those entities be provided. So the requirement is that the PPP-related contingent liability cannot exceed 5% of GDP. Because there are none in play at the moment, that number is actually 0, so we're actually meeting it. However, there is further discussion to explain to the FROC why we're actually in that position. So, Mr. President, in closing, a full response to the FROC report will be issued to the committee. It will be available for public consumption, and there is a need for continued engagement with this committee so that there is a common understanding of the terms that are laid out within that. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you, the Leader of Government Business. Because it will be fresh in your mind, it should be fresh in your mind, I thought I should ask that question for the clarity of our members and the general public. I know that you have zeroed in on the report on the PPPs. Yes? Could you tell me where we are with the gravel and concrete and also the Grain Postal Corporation? Because these were spoken about very heavily in relation to PPPs. So I would like to know where we are.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. The information I have is discussions are ongoing. I do not have anything specific that I can add to that other than those discussions are ongoing.
Thank you, Mr. President. One question for the Leader of Government Business. Regarding the FROC report, there was a concern raised about, in regards to the debt to GDP ratio, of not all the debt being accounted for because of the SOEs and statutory boards are not included. Has that issue been addressed by the Ministry of Finance?
Thank you. The Ministry of Finance is working on, in terms of the existing SOEs, they are working on consolidating the data. Right now, central government accounts are separate from those of the SOEs. The task to consolidate and bring those together is actually a significant one, but work has started on it, and the intention is to bring those together.
Item 8, presentation of papers and reports from select committees.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the following papers and reports be laid on the table. The annual report and report of the Director of Audit on the financial statement of the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council for the year ended 31st December 2016. 2, report of the Director of Audit, Grenada, on the financial statements of the Grenada National Stadium Authority for the year ended 31st December 2015. 3, Fiscal Responsibility Oversight Committee, FROC, 2017 Annual Report. 4, Report of the Director of Audit, Grenada, on the financial statements of T.A. Marichaud Community College, TAMCC, for the year ended 31st December 2016. 5, Report of the Director of Audit, Grenada, on the resources managed by the period, for the period from 1st of January 2017 to 31st December 2017 by the Project Coordinating Unit within the Ministry of Finance and Energy for the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program, CARSIP, and the income and expenditure for accounting period ended 31st December 2017. 6, Government of Grenada Compliance Assessment Report, Supplementary Budget 2017. And finally, 7, Supplementary Estimates for the period 1st July 2018 to 31st December 2018.
Food and Nutrition Council for the year ending the 31st of December 2016. 2, report of the Director of Audit, Grenada, on the financial statements of the Grenada National Stadium Authority for the year ending the 31st of December 2015. 3, Fiscal Responsibility Oversight Committee 2017 Annual Report. 4, report of the Director of Audit, Grenada, on the fiscal statements of the T.A. Marichaud Community College for the year ending 31st December 2016. 5, report of the Director of Audit, Grenada, on the resource management for the period from the 1st of January 2017 to the 31st of December 2017 by the Project Coordination Unit within the Ministry of Finance and Energy for the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program and the income and expenditure for accounting period ending the 31st of December 2017. 6, Government of Grenada Compliance Assessment Report, Supplementary Budget 2018. And 7, Supplementary Estimates for the period 1st July 2018 to the 31st of December 2018. Honorable members, these papers are hereby ordered laid on the table. Now, yes, Senator.
Mr. President, sorry, through you. I just want to make a brief comment on the papers that was laid, and to just say that when we have a report coming to us from Stadium Authority for 2015 and we in 2018, and almost coming to the end, and I know the FRA have specific rules now that state a statutory organization is supposed to present their accounts within 3 months after the year, and to the minister, line minister, to be late. So we're breaking the law, and we're here accepting this without comment. I just wanted to make that comment. It's a bit frustrating.
Yes. It takes a bit of getting used to the new facility. Rule 28, moving of motions. So let me just say to the new senators that these documents are exceedingly important and they form part of your responsibility because these reports report on the activities of state-owned enterprises and other bodies of state. It gives a fiscal review of the performance, etc., etc. Now, these are laid on the table, but it gives you an opportunity to study them. You can frame questions arising from your study. You can seek clarifications arising from your study. Indeed, you can engage in debating. And Rule 28, moving of motion, says, subject to the Constitution and these standing orders, it shall be competent for any senator
to propose by way of motion any matter for debate in the Senate. So this gives you an opportunity to exercise your responsibility and your due diligence as you are required to do. And based on my experience as a presiding officer, too many times these documents are just laid on the table and not a single word, not a drumbeat or funeral note is heard. The documents just go, and again I'm saying this because I believe failure to examine these documents and to be actively engaged amongst that dereliction of duty. So for the freshman senators, and it's a point that Senator Diali has raised on several occasions in the past, although I'm not minded, Senator, of any occasion in which you did in fact introduce any of these documents for debate or for clarification. So I just thought I should, in the process of orienting the new senators to their responsibilities, their duties and privileges and the rules, what is required of you. Thank you. I think we can move on.
Item 9, petitions. Item 10, government notices. Item 11, unofficial notices. Item 12, questions. Item 13, personal explanations. Item 14, motions.
Mr. President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas debates on the gracious address delivered by the Governor-General on the occasion of the ceremonial state opening of the first session of the 10th Parliament on Friday the 27th of April 2018 was deferred to a date to be named, be it resolved that the said address be now debated.
That the motion standing in the name of the Leader of Government's business, which was just read, be debated.
Mr. President, I wish to propose an amendment to this motion. So it now reads, be it resolved that the said address be deferred to a date to be named.
Honorable members, the question is that the motion be amended to read, whereas debate on the gracious address delivered by the Governor-General on the occasion of the ceremonial state opening of the first session of the 10th Parliament on Friday the 27th April 2018 was deferred to a date to be named, be it resolved that the address be now deferred. All those who have that opinion, aye. Say aye. For the contrary opinion, say nay. I think the ayes have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is deferred. Senator Steele.
Mr. President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it was necessary to provide for the services of the State of Grenada for the year 2018 by means of a Supplementary Appropriation Act, be it resolved that the Supplementary Appropriation Number 1 Act 2018 for the period July 1st to December 31st, 2018 be approved.
Honourable members, the question proposed is, whereas it was necessary to provide for the services of the State of Grenada for the year 2018 by means of a Supplementary Appropriation Act, Be it resolved that Supplementary Appropriation Act Number 1, Act 2018 for the period July 1st to December the 31st, 2018 be approved.
Mr. President, as this is a money motion, I wish to signal to this Honourable House that I have the Speaker's seal of consent to proceed. Mr. President, the Supplementary Appropriation Act that this motion speaks to seeks parliamentary approval to bring additional monies not budgeted for in the 2018 estimates of revenues and expenditure, into the system, and provides a breakdown of how those additional funds would be spent. This supplemental is to appropriate an additional sum of $36,134,512.88 to the Service of Grenada for the period July 1st to December 31st, 2018. Mr. President, this sum includes $28,106,351.88 for capital expenditure funded entirely by external grants. Not loans, Mr. President, but by external grants. In addition, $8,028,161 current expenditure is funded from local sources. These are additional revenues generated through inland revenue, through customs revenues that have exceeded the targets that were estimated back in December 2018. What is significant is that these additional sums are used to fund capital expenses and not recurrent expenses. Mr. President, every cent is allocated to capital projects that create employment, that expand the economy, expand economic activity, contribute to national development, whether it's the upgrade of our schools, our education system, infrastructural development, whether it is at a national or a community level, whether it's providing opportunities for our youth, additional support for healthcare, additional support for fisheries, expanding our social safety nets, but not for recurrent expenses, which means we estimated accurately the cost of running government when we presented the 2018 budget back in December last year, and we remain on track, Mr. President. Our ability to do this is a reflection of good fiscal and economic management, a trademark now of this administration, Mr. President. Mr. President, some of the specific areas financed include an increase in the payments made to elderly households by $100, and Senator Garraway spoke to this. Mr. President, we said that if the fiscal space allowed, we would provide additional support to the elderly households under the SEED program. Mr. President, a promise made, a promise kept. The total cost of this increase to elderly households is $1,800,400. The ongoing regularization of teachers, nurses, payments to our teachers shall be addressed at a cost, Mr. President, of $1.4 million. So again, meeting our commitments, our obligations, our promises to the unions in terms of regularization of both our teachers and our nurses. An allocation of $500,000 for support for the needy and uniform assistance programs. A vital service to those who are more vulnerable and require the assistance. Regarding capital expenditure, allocations are made for major roadworks, upgrading of government buildings, including schools, health centers, and the General Hospital, in addition to special projects which address community-based infrastructural needs as well as providing significant opportunities for small local contractors. And Mr. President, in keeping with the fiscal responsibility law, the Ministry of Finance undertook all the necessary assessments to ensure that this supplementary estimate conforms with all of the fiscal rules, specifically the primary expenditure rule, which states that the rate of growth of primary expenditure cannot exceed 2% of that of the previous year. So as required by the FRL, a compliance report also accompanies this bill. Mr. President, as I ran through those highlights of this supplementary appropriation, I've intentionally left out probably the most significant expenditure till last, and that is pension payments to 56 workers affected by the Pensions Disqualification Act of 1983. This is a matter that has frustrated workers for over 35 years, an injustice that has been fought out in our courts for many years, and a matter that this government, together with the unions, have sought to find an amicable solution. And I want to underline amicable solution. Mr. President, to this end, government has committed to pay those 56 workers, eligible workers, for the period the 4th of April 1983 to the 22nd of February 1985, of which $4.4 million is allocated from local revenues in this supplementary estimate, and $2.8 million, which constitutes retroactive payments, will be settled by grants sourced outside of this appropriation. Mr. President, payments to these workers will start at the end of this month. This is not only a historic achievement, Mr. President, one some thought they would never see, but a substantial statement of government's intent to address wider issues of pension restoration for all eligible workers and reform of the pension system moving forward. Mr. President, it's also important to point out that based on the Hermelin Armstrong Court judgment that established that although government has a legal obligation for restoring pensions between the period April 1983 to February 1985, government does not have a legal obligation from 1985 onwards. I want to repeat that, Mr. President. Government does not have a legal obligation to restore pensions from 1985. However, this government believes it has a moral responsibility, Mr. President, to do what is fair and to do what is just. It is in this spirit that together with the unions, with the workers, we've sought to find a reasonable solution to treat with eligible workers from 1985 onwards. And it's in this spirit, Mr. President, the government and the unions have sought to establish guiding principles based on affordability, fairness, and fiscal responsibility. We have to be responsible for the actions that we take moving forward. These guiding principles are outlined in a memorandum of understanding which was signed in February of this year. And discussions are now taking place to move from guiding principles to the framing parameters of a pension scheme. Putting flesh on the bones, Mr. President, applying the principles practically to come up with a final solution. The MOU is not the final solution. It is guiding principles. Mr. President, before I continue, I think it's important to remind ourselves where we came from and how we got to where we are now. Sometimes, Mr. President, our memories short, things improve and we forget just how bad things were previously. Mr. President, what came before us? Mismanaged economy. An economy and a country in financial ruin. Recession. Average negative growth of 2%. Record high unemployment, over 40%. Skyrocketing debt, the debt to GDP ratio, 108%. High fiscal deficit, we were spending more than we were earning. We were unable to pay our bills. We had unpaid claims in excess of $110 million. We had $50 million outstanding to our public workers, back pay. Salaries were paid late. When they were paid, we had to sell government assets to pay salaries, Mr. President. And at a time, no pay increases. No pay increases over that time. Lucky to receive salary. And at a time where governments in the region were sending workers home. Barbados, Mr. President, sent 6,000 workers home. It's important for us to set the framing of this, Mr. President. Mr. President, that was what we met when we came into office 5 years ago. But with considerable national sacrifice, with the support of the workers, the labor movement, churches, the private sector, civil society, we embarked on homegrown structural adjustment program. Its intent was to bring fiscal stability to the affairs of our nation. Our shared sacrifice, Mr. President, has today helped transform our economy. We now, today, have the fastest growing economy in the region. Average growth rate 5%, minus 2% back then. Unemployment down from 40%, in excess of 40%, down to 24%. Still too high. We still have a lot of work to do, but moving in the right direction. From a deficit, owing money, spending more than we earn, to managing our resources, to actually build a surplus. We are one out of Latin America and the Caribbean. A World Bank economists report Grenada is the only country, and I think it's something like 31 states, that has a fiscal surplus, Mr. President. Unpaid claims, down to 0 for claims over 60 days. Our debt, remember, 108% GDP, debt to GDP ratio, now 65%. And within 2 years, we should bring that down to 55%, Mr. President. And Mr. President, not only paying salaries on time, we haven't heard workers being paid late, but not only salaries being paid late, back pay, $50 million paid to our workers, increments, pay increases. Mr. President, over this period, $110 million has been paid to our public workers, addressing all that went before. I repeat, $110 million in back pay, in increments, in pay increases. And Mr. President, all without sending a single worker home. Not a single worker retrenched. Mr. President, this is an incredible achievement and a reflection. It's a reflection, Mr. President, of that shared sacrifice. So here we are. Grenada today has turned a corner. We've gotten our financial house in order. From a regional basket case to a shining light of recovery and transformation within the region. So, Mr. President, now back to pension reform. Today we seek approval for this supplementary appropriation, which includes a payment of $7.2 million to those 56 workers who, in the restoration of their pensions from that period, 83 to 85. Mr. President, this is another major achievement. I think in today's sit-in, the word historic, whether, well, we'll come on to that, but it is a historic, certainly a very memorable moment. And it's another victory for workers and for the unions. But Mr. President, instead of recognizing these successes and building on them responsibly, what do we hear? That there is a breakdown in pension reform. Clearly, Mr. President, the terms laid out in that memorandum of understanding are certainly clearly open to interpretation. Mr. President, two issues have been raised. First, that after serving 26 2/3 years, a public servant is able to retire and receive their full gratuity and full monthly pension. And that's regardless of whether they reach pensionable age of 60 years. And secondly, that the minimum pension replacement rate at that point of 70%, which is stated in the MOU, is too low. Mr. President, I wish to kind of build on these 2 points. The first, let's take a scenario, the 26 2/3 year rule. Let's take this reasonable scenario. A public servant entering the service at the age of 20, many in service, ripe age to enter the service. They enter the service age 20. They serve 26 2/3 years. So at the age of 47, he or she, according to the presentation from the unions, will be entitled to a full gratuity and full monthly pension. Therefore, an old age pension that's intended to sustain us as a form of social security in our later years, when we are less able to work and to contribute, but instead we'll be using what is a pension for our retirement, our old age, as a supplementary income for a young, able-bodied person with at least 13 productive years ahead of them. Is that, Mr. President, what a pension is supposed to be for? I'd have retired a long time ago, Mr. President, if I knew that was the case. Mr. President, based on this scenario, there will be a massive, massive cost to this. Retiring at the age of 47. And that is a cost, Mr. President. Everyone thinks it's government. It's a cost government will bear. Mr. President, it's a cost the people will have to bear. It's ordinary taxpayers' money, the hard-earned money, Mr. President, that will go to fund this specific scenario. And Mr. President, this is at a time when we actually need to be thinking about raising the retirement age from 60 to 65. If we do not do this based on all of the actuarial reports, Mr. President, our current NIS system will become insolvent. We will not be able to make payouts to the beneficiaries as they would expect. So this is not only us in terms of the fragility of our national insurance system and the sensitivities associated with a public pension scheme. But this is the same throughout the region. National insurance schemes throughout the region. Barbados, Mr. President, has raised the age of retirement to 67 years. 67 years within the public service. And that is to address the imbalance between contributions and payouts. So if we follow the suggestion that's being put before us, Mr. President, what's being proposed is, instead of following what we need to be doing, which is increasing the retirement age, the proposal is effectively lowering it to 47 based on that scenario. Mr. President, this makes absolutely no sense at all. It will bankrupt public funds. It will not be sustainable. The second issue raised, 70% pension replacement rate. It's too low. Mr. President, the rate agreed must comply with our fiscal rules. And government actually offered, its offer was 70.1%, 0.1% increment. But Mr. President, that brings that primary expenditure rule, which should be no more than 2%, the offer made by government, 70.1%, brings that threshold to 1.9%, just below the PE rule. Mr. President, what fiscal space does that then leave us? What fiscal space does that leave us after servicing this pension liability? What does that leave us in terms of educating our children? Fundamental responsibility of the government. Providing health care to our sick. Supporting our most vulnerable. Providing opportunities for our youth. Maintaining our roads. Supporting our farmers. Building our economy for the benefit of all. The benefit of all, not just a few. Mr. President, government has a responsibility to serve all of its people the best it can. That's the fundamental responsibility. That's why you're voted into office. That's why you're voted out of office if you do not perform. So, Mr. President, if we were to focus all of our available resources, that's the people's money, just to serve a few public servants, we'll be failing in our fundamental responsibility to service all of our citizens. Mr. President, over the past 5 years, $110 million of taxpayers' money has gone to increased financial support for our public workers. In good faith, government has committed to addressing this 35-year-old vexing issue of pension restoration. This good faith is demonstrated through the passing of this supplementary appropriation for the $7.2 million for those 56 workers in the restoration of their pensions. And I want to just reiterate, Mr. President, in terms of those workers from 1985 onwards, government has no legal obligation to do so. However, government asserts its commitment to the restoration of pensions to all eligible public workers, but using a formula that is fair, fiscally responsible, and long-term sustainable. This is not time. This is not the time for us to be financially reckless. This is not the time for us to throw away all of the gains achieved and go back to those dark old days. To move forward, we must do what is fair, responsible for the entire country. Mr. President, this debate will continue as later we present the Pensions Amendment Act, which speaks specifically to this. So I'll close on those comments. So, Mr. President, the motion before us brings into the system $36 million. These sums are from grants, local resources, not loans, and to fund capital programs, not recurrent programs. And they touch critical elements of our national development agenda, and it touches citizens of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. Mr. President, it is for these reasons that I commend this motion to this Honourable House. I thank you.
Senator Steele.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And because I am still a freshman, may I ask for some guidance as to what time I may have in terms of what I may want to ask or say? Thank you very much. So you may have to order dinner. Okay. The ambience is great. But it wouldn't take long because truth and facts does not need to be that long. It is very simple. First of all, let us place the labor movement appreciation to the government of the day for the current state that we are in, where 56 workers will receive the justice that has been held back for quite a while. We want to place that on record. It is extremely important to mention Comrade Sister Hummelin Armstrong. I think she must be recognized as that brave soldier, that brave worker who 2 years before her retirement, Mr. President, as you would know, said, I, Hummelin Armstrong, will be the one that will allow my name or my case to address the disqualification of pension. The labor movement could not have done that before unless we got someone. And the Hummelin Armstrong case had nothing to do with 1985. The Hummelin Armstrong case for all public officers had to do with established workers. And if we were to fast forward, the issue of the legal aspect of the pension disqualification has not been addressed by the parties who have established a very good working relationship. And what is a bit disheartening is that when we sat just before the election, because we must put things in context, the memorandum of understanding that we signed was signed by the representatives of the government engagement team and ourselves. And there is a context and a written word. And it is clearly understood that both parties will not pursue any legal discussion. That's a fact. It is a fact that what gave rise to the Memorandum of Understanding was the clear undertaking of what we consider genuine, and I still believe that we are all genuine people, seeking to find a solution to a national vexing issue. And therefore, that is why when we signed that agreement on the Sunday in March, for those who condemned us, we responded by saying that there is no bad time to sign a good agreement. I want to repeat, there is no bad time to sign a good agreement. But it can become bad if there is attempts made to undo it. We are very hopeful that we can find a solution. Let me explain this here. We are very hopeful that we can find a solution. But we want to repeat that the resolution of the Hummelin Armstrong matter was on the basis that neither of the parties will enforce or discuss any legal solution. But it will be a negotiated settlement. It will be a negotiated settlement, and government's responsibility to the thousands of public officers who from 1983 to present established public officers who have gone home and who are about to go home without receiving a pension. And I'm not going to make the link that parliamentarians after 2 terms receive a pension or receive benefits. That's a different discourse. That's a different discourse. But I am accepting that the thousands of teachers outside there and the thousands of public officers are listening to this discourse today. And in this struggle, there are at least 3 limbs. There's the legal, which we have all agreed to give up. Because the unions themselves, ourselves, have been contemplating legal action for that clarification on the Humlin Armstrong matter and public officers. But we didn't, because there's this understanding of the parties. Not just understanding, but clearly written. But apart from the legal, there is the political. And the political was at play, apparently, leading up to the election. So, for instance, as I said, on that bad day when we used to sign a good agreement, because there's no bad time to sign a good agreement, but we know where we are now, that elections have passed. And we are really, really looking forward to the demonstration of the goodwill and the understanding of this administration, that they will listen to the people who are part of the negotiations, who are in that room with us. When we signed the agreement and the wording of the agreement and what was taken out of the original proposals from government and from the union, so arrived at where we arrived. And then there is the industrial. So we have the legal, we have the political, and we have the industrial. What is our preference? Our preference is to find a settlement around the table. And in the spirit of which we started, Mr. President. The spirit in which we said the following. 1, no legal arguments. So that is why, for instance, the Attorney General and others have not been present in the discussion. The Attorney General, previous Attorney General, were engaged in the initial discussions and then were absent. Because what we wanted to find, and that is why also the chief personnel from the Ministry of Finance were not involved in the negotiations. Not one member, I want to repeat, not one member of the Ministry of Finance that is now apparently directing what needs to be agreed upon were engaged in that room when we reached a final agreement on about 3 or 4 consecutive discussions. As a matter of fact, there is a representative from the government side that I have respect for everyone, but there's just one individual. I call her a lady, a stalwart, who put everything out, despite how tired she was, despite the fact that she was faced with the issue of the Nawasa struggle that we had, everything that she had, and she put everything into it for us to arrive at an agreement. So there was not one person in that room from the Ministry of Finance. There was not one person in that room from the Legal Affairs Department. But we are now faced with these interpretations. We have said the following. Yes, through you, Mr. President, Senator Steele, there are 2 issues that are very much of concern to us. The issue of the 70% being the minimum or the maximum, and that we can find an easy solution to. We have said so. We have demonstrated that. The MOU says that we'll continue that discussion, and it will be influenced, the additional, the more beyond 70, will be influenced by the affordability of the government. And that's clear. And we have never said no. But we are continuing discussions. Where we have what appears to be that insurmountable approach, but I'm confident that we'll find that settlement. I believe in the integrity of the people who are in that room. I believe in their integrity. The 26 and 2/3 years of service qualified in our discussion for individuals once they leave the service to receive the gratuity and the pension. And just one correction through you, Mr. President. Anyone who receives a gratuity would receive a reduced pension. So it's not a full pension. If you receive a full pension, Mr. President, as you would know, you would not receive any gratuity. Once you take a gratuity, because a gratuity is an upfront payment of that amount which is due to you. We have said that from 83 onwards to present, for the persons who have qualified, those who have been appointed through the Judicial Legal Services Commission, the officers from, I think, Inspector Dung or Sergeant Dung, who have been appointed by the Commissioner of Prisons, the gazetted officers who have been appointed by the Public Service Commission, the public officers who have been appointed by the Public Services Commission, the prison officers, the teachers, etc. From 83, we will combine, because the government was trying to save finances, and that's correct, and we accepted that. It is our sacrifices that has brought back us to where we are today. We, the salaried workers, through the Structural Adjustment Program, as we speak right now, there is a big leakage in terms of tax collection, income tax collections on the professionals and the self-employed, etc. And the government have accepted that. We are the ones who have always been prepared and will be prepared to make the sacrifice. But what did we do? Rather than putting our nation through more problems, we have agreed to combine the NIS benefit and the government benefit. But obviously, because the NIS is a national law applicable to all workers, the NIS cannot kick in before age 60. So whereas in the past, and whereas the argument of the labor movement, Mr. President, when the matter went to court, our argument was that all eligible public officers are entitled to be treated under the 1958 Pension Act, which would have given them a non-contributory government pension until they're dead. Yes? But we have said around the table, and we will still agree to this, and we will not fight over this. You have my word on this. Here our words, our bond. That's how we operate. We fight hard, we fight fiercely, but we implement fairly that which we have agreed upon. And we have said we will drop that argument and we will combine both. And therefore, at age 60, the hypothetical example used by the good senator, someone that we have a very good relationship with myself. As a matter of fact, only last night we resolved the solid waste matter that we are about to meet with tomorrow, because we are handling different industrial matters. So we have demonstrated our commitment, because without even getting something in writing, we give our words and we have implemented. That's the way we operate. That's the way we operate. I want, on this side here, and all of us here to remember this. We have said, so government's obligation, once that worker turned age 60, based on your hypothetical example, for a worker who started to work at age 20 and retiring at age 60. So let's take the other end of the argument. A public servant who starts to work at age 20 and retires at age 60 and getting the full pension, the only commitment that government have is 10%, whereas in the past government had 100%. Let us look at the whole context. At age 60, after 40 years of continuous service to this country and to the government of Grenada, government's liability in terms of that worker pension would only be 10%. We stay at the 70%. There ought to be a discussion to go above 70, but because we have agreed to 70 as the base, I'm using 70 as that example. So government's liability will only be 10%. And yes, it follows that if a worker, I'm going to your example, retires after 26 and 2/3 years of service at age 47. If that worker takes a gratuity, government would have a reduced pension to pay. It will be reduced, government alone. So I'm agreeing with you, I'm underlining this, Mr. President, through you. Government would have a reduced pension to pay up until age 60. And at the attainment of age 60, government, it is quite possible, will have absolutely nothing to pay. It is such that the reduced pension that government is bearing, so if a worker goes at age 50, for instance, and takes a gratuity based on the pension formula, that worker would receive a reduced pension for 12.5 years. So at age 50, that will take that worker into age 62 or 63 to receive a reduced pension, which will be less than what NIS is paying, and therefore government would have absolutely no responsibility to pay. I want to repeat that. I don't want it to be taken that the workers who have made those sacrifices after 35 years are making demands that are unreasonable. Workers have retired into abject poverty. We are addressing what we are addressing here today, and I'm very happy about it. I stand proud here. I want to thank the leaders, my comrade Madonna Harford, Lauret Clarkson, Clarice Charles, Ira McQueen, Mr. President, you, as that leader, who had the foresight to take that fight. But as we speak right now, after the 85, these workers are still into abject poverty. Do not, for one moment, I'm not saying that this is what the government is doing. It may be possible to interpret what you have said in that way. I do not want to use this house here to make that implications. But we must not be made to look as though we are greedy. We must not be made to look as though we want to take from the state and bring us back into mismanagement. That's not what we want to do. What we want to do is, after giving 26 and 2/3 years of service, to be able to retire if we choose, receive our benefits, or at age 60, receive our benefits. As a matter of fact, given the state of our economy and given the state of our small island economies right through the region, it is unthinkable that a mass of people, it is unthinkable that people, after giving 26 and 2/3 years of service, you're going to wake up en masse and leave. I mean, it's hypothetically possible. Everything is hypothetically possible. Everything, as we speak right now. But let us bring reason to bear. In quite a number, in other places that we have, retirement after X or Y amount of years of service. What is the history of people getting up and leave and go? Because even if you go and you take your gratuity, and let us say that gratuity is $60,000. For the average person, the average worker, the average working class person, the first 10 or 15 years of your life of work is used to help your siblings, your mother, your father, that sort of thing. And then you begin to get involved in looking after yourself if you have a family yourself. And most of us, most public officers would retire with a mortgage over their head. And if you leave at age 46 and you don't have a guaranteed income, the pension that you get, which is a reduced income, wouldn't be able to carry it. You can better bring reason to bear to it. Your projections are always based on reason. Because in one of your earlier documents, if you recognize, has been pointed out here, Mr. President, the government wage bill is less than what it had projected. As a matter of fact, it is 8% if I were to look at the document. And the rationale for it is the same point the labor movement was making, that the positions that you have noted in the budget to put monies towards would not materialize. These positions would fall away or would not be filled. I've seen it been accepted here. I couldn't speak on the document, so I don't want to go down there. I thought I should just raise this. Our pension, our discussion is based on the following. We want to repeat. We are interested. As a matter of fact, we met yesterday morning. We agreed to a meeting yesterday at 7:30 with the government engagement team. There was no new proposal, but we have committed and we are due to meet on Friday. So we have not walked away from the table. But it is important for us to bring to the attention of our members, and bearing in mind that we are almost in August and school starts in September. So it is important to bring that to the attention of teachers and the public officers. Yes, I want to repeat. That it was important for us to bring to the attention of the nation and our members and our teachers. Because the interesting thing about teachers is that 98% or more of teachers are established or made permanent from day one in the system. So the agreement that we had, or I still think that we have, is that the government will combine the NIS payment together with the government payment to pay that monthly pension. So government would recognize or realize a reduction in its liabilities, and that aspect of the legal arguments were never resolved. Both parties agreed to drop the legal discussion because the original proposal from the unions, when we stated our interest, Mr. President, was to do two things. One, get a government pension and get the NS pension as two separate income streams, which would have resulted in something that even as trade unionists, and as much as we want to see the best for workers and retirees, would have been unfair. It was possible through that argument, as it is possible now, for up to the 85, for someone to go home and at your retirement to get over 100% of your salary, because they are two separate income streams. But we, in the labor movement, agreed and felt that that was not good. In other words, we cannot defend and we cannot advance that when you retire, you will receive more than you are making when you were actively working. And that is why we agreed. And that is why around the table, I want to stress again, around the negotiating table, Mr. President, our discussion, the representatives of the government, which are not made up of anyone from the Ministry of Finance, certainly around the table, they may have been advised, received, and there were no one from the Ministry of Legal Affairs, they may have been advised, received, were present there. But we agreed. There are two aspects of the memorandum. Phase one, and look again at the document. And I know that legal minds can take things written by us, the lay people, and find different interpretations. Yes? Phase one says the following, or what's that effect? The people who have been appointed, what we call permanent, and phase two, these same people, that is where it is in phase two. A new pension scheme will be designed. It is the old pension scheme that we use for phase one, which is up to the end of December 2018. Yes? From the 1st of January 2019 is when a new pension scheme will be designed. But the fundamental difference between the post-83, which is now 85, because this is what this bill seeks to do, right? This is what this bill seeks to do. The post-83, and for ease of reference, using the MOU, I will keep repeating 1983. But we know that 1983 applies to 1985. But because this is a document that I'm referencing, yes, I'm going to keep saying 1983, because that's where we were. The only difference between the post-83 and the pre-83, and just remember, it's the same as post-85 and post-83, the only difference would be that we are combining, because there's an expectation, Mr. President, through you, over all the years of our legal struggles, over all the years of our industrial battles, for the restoration of pension, the people who are currently in the government service were expected to be treated similar to pre-83. And therefore, we agreed around the table that what shall be different is the combining of the NIS. Therefore, given government and the state, let me repeat, given government and the state a significant reduction in the liability. Phase two will address those matters that are now being raised to be placed in phase one, which had nothing to do with phase one. What is our expectation? Our expectation, Mr. President, through you, is that getting back to the table on Friday, we will be able to continue that discussion that will get back the spirit that we had in February. That spirit which allowed us to sign an agreement into the night. That spirit that did not allow anyone from the Legal Affairs Department. That spirit, Mr. President, that did not allow anyone from the Ministry of Finance. As a matter of fact, the records will show, and it will be interesting to find out why. We know why. But it will be interesting to find out why for the others, as to why the original members of the broad committee were not present during those final discussions. The government representative side was not made up of its full complement in terms of the representatives from the Ministry of Finance, because what we wanted to find was in agreement in terms of what will be the minimum age of retirement, etc., what will be the quantum, and then finance will come in and work out the details. And that is why in the MOU, you would recognize that we gave up, we threw our hands up in the air, and we say, coming out of the agreement, once we work out the amount that is due, that payment will be based solely on the ability or inability of government to pay. So what is up for discussion? What is up for discussion would have been the more and what implications it will have. And when we work out what will be the retroactive amount, because whatever agreement that we arrive at, anyone who has retired between 83 and now would be due some form of retroactive pay. We will agree on a plan influenced by the Ministry of Finance. Influenced by the Ministry of Finance going forward. And we are sticking to this. As I've said, we gave our words. We gave our word is our bond. But as it relates to the retirement, once you retire from the public service, once you are appointed before December 31st, 2018, once you leave, you ought to be allowed to go with your pension, because that was our discussion. And that was our agreement. Because I would like to you, Mr. President, because you see, we will be around for a long time. This side and that side. And I could clearly recall, apart from the question of the time that we signed the agreement, as to whether or not an MOU could be enforced, or whether or not an MOU is an agreement. We in the labor movement knows that it is an agreement. Yes? But we battled all of these in order to be able to put on the table for our teachers, our public officers, our nurses, our doctors, that assurance that the Pension Disqualification Act will not impact them in the manner that it did for the past 35 years. Because remember, from 83 to now, apart from special pension, because there are people who receive their other aspects, what we had to work out, and where the Ministry of Legal Affairs had to come in, yes, was how do we combine the different laws? We get about 5 or 6 different entities, different bodies that have governed or ruled on there with different benefits and applications. And we undertook to find a way of harmonizing those. And this is where the Ministry of Legal Affairs, after we did what we call the basic work, 70 as the minimum and discussion for more, 26 and 2/3 as reestablished, yes, for post-83, which is now 85. We would like to see, because we have engagements coming forward. And it is not good for us to develop mistrust with each other. I'm not saying that it is there. I see this. I want to assure the government side that we have not reached that stage, because it is an avenue or a stage that one should avoid as much as possible of going. Once mistrust steps in, it can impact everything going forward. We have a number of engagement. If my recollection is right, I think that the salary negotiations that we have had comes to an end on December 31st. And as was mentioned by the leader of government business, Mr. President Chuyu, the fact that we went public to bring attention to the nation, sitting at the head table were the leaders of the 3 main unions in the public service: Public Workers Union, UNITA Union of Teachers, and the Technical and Allied Workers Union. But out of every challenge comes something positive most times. This has been able to bring us together. If you recall, in the last round of negotiations, because they're all linked, we were separate. We did a press conference yesterday, and I'm heartened by that because I know we have discussions upcoming. We all sat together on the same table, and we gave one commitment: that there will not be there will not be 2 voices, there will not be 3 voices. There shall be one voice. And it is in all of our interests, and we genuinely believe this. We want this. We desire it. We crave for it. And the reason that we crave for it, in those battles, it creates disruptions that impacts us all. It is good for us in the labor movement many times, because we have learned that unless workers struggle for things, most times they take it for granted and don't hold on to it. And that's all of our history here, whether you sit on this side or that side. Almost everything that we have had to struggle for it. But given the level of social dialogue that we have been enjoying, brought on to us, forced upon us by the crisis, global financial crisis, brought on by greedy capitalists, not with the workers, Because even in Grenada, my brother, Mr. President Chu, Sir Badger, right? Because even in this crisis, the most millionaires have been created and billionaires have been created. But we put our shoulders to the wheel, and we'll continue to do it. And we give assurance to this nation that we'll continue to do it. But we want to ensure that when public officers go home, they go home to a decent standard of living. Yes? But not at the expense of sinking the state. Not at the expense of city. We are used to taking no increases. We have demonstrated that. We have known that. And what we worked out, that the liability that we have saved government by bringing in, accepting the NIS because we didn't fight over it, would be a tremendous saving from government. And therefore, in closing, Mr. President, I want to thank you. But not just thanking you as you preside here, because you must feel proud, if I can address you on this matter. You must feel proud as to where we are with the 56 individuals. But I know that your heart would remain open, because it is not just about the 56 workers. Because when you led that struggle, Mr. President, forgive me, but I must do this. When you led that struggle together with Sister Harford, our Sister Clarice Charles, and others, it was not about giving people pension, that pension up to 85. Let us place that on record. We want to thank you for the leadership that you demonstrated in the labor movement. And interestingly enough, in my discussion most recently with Sister Harford, she mentioned the following. Public workers must compliment TAU, must compliment Senator Humphrey, the then labor representative in the Senate, that despite the fact that TAU had a minuscule amount of workers who stood to benefit, it was not about TAU. It was about the working class of this country. And all the major unions, the 3 major unions, contributed equally. And as I mentioned this, there's something I need to clarify because it came on one of the national programs. The labor movement carried the bill for the Humlin-Armstrong legal battle. I want to repeat. The labor movement carried the bill for the Humlin-Armstrong legal battle. The police were involved. That's both the gazetted officers and the Welfare Association, the Prison Service, the Public Workers Union, Grenada Union of Teachers, and the Technical and Allied Workers Union. And if I were to miss out any, my humble apologies. But I call upon the state to let us not just now try to use a legal argument, because the legal matter was not resolved. And we all may have our hardened legal views. And certainly, the government being able to have its legal affairs department will feel very strong because they are legally trained. But we agreed not to pursue the matter legally because we knew that we could find a settlement around the table as we have demonstrated in the past. And we are not doing this because we are greedy. We are not doing this because we want to bring problems to this country. We are doing this because after given this amount of years of service, and even in the private sector, you have 2 pensions. In some cases in the private sector, you have 2 pensions. In the private sector, we represent workers that go home with a very good pension because the government is also the workers' employer. Let me make that point, because workers are also contributing to NIS. In the private sector, we have pension scheme, some contributory, some non-contributory. So when the worker goes home, the worker gets the NIS at age 60, and the worker also gets the private pension. So we are not trying anything new, but we gave up on this argument and decided to combine both. And therefore, as we continue, we look forward to a resolution of this matter, so that the next time we come back to this house, I can stand here, and all of us can stand here, and not feel partially happy, because it is only 85 that has been resolved. But we can feel wholly happy, and indeed make this a historic red day, not part red, as some of us may have a little red in our pocket, you know what I mean? Right? Our red shirt. Right? But make this indeed a historic red day, that the workers of this country, the public officers of this country, can feel justly proud that at least phase 1, because phase 2 would address the rest, because you have unestablished workers, so it is not all government employees, the unestablished workers from 83, or even before 83, are not receiving a pension. I want to make that point. So we can find a resolution, which is phase 2. That will fall in phase 2. So, Mr. President, through you, thank you very much. And we indeed look forward to a resolution to this matter. And that rather than in September with the possibility of one never knows what, we can have a September in which we can all have a rally to praise all the parties, the government and the labor movement. One big celebration that the pension matter has been resolved. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to give my full support to the motion before this honorable House. And just to point out a few things and not to go as short as my honorable colleague on the other side has indicated when he started. But just to point out some important aspects of this motion, Mr. President. And one, to note that this is grant funding. I think this must be noted. And no impact is going to come in terms of loans, Mr. President. I think this is critical in this supplementary bill. And what is most important to Mr. President, this amendment is before us, and it's supplementary amendment, and it's done within the confines of our macroeconomic targets and indicators, and I think that is also commendable. We must commend our finance persons for ensuring that we stay within that and we do not break the law. Mr. President, I think most importantly, this supplementary amendment is to address budgetary requirements for critical initiatives. And while some time would have been spent on the issue of pensions, I think the issue of the public assistance is one that also requires some attention, and I think that is a very important initiative that this supplementary amendment seeks to address. Mr. President, Deputy President in the chair. Mr. Deputy President, the issue of the pension is one that will always be a topic of great concern, not only for unions, not only for government, but most importantly for our workers. I do not know if all the persons who are persons within the union movement were public officers. And I have been a public officer, I've worked as a public officer for 17 years. So I understand the situation as well. So I really want to commend all parties who have been engaged in ensuring that we get to this stage. But Mr. Deputy President, the record has shown that this government, time and time again, and over decades, have done more for the people of this nation than any other institution. And so we have a responsibility to highlight that. And the record has shown. The support they have given us at the polls reflect that, Mr. Deputy President. Mr. Deputy President, through you, the honorable member representing the labor movement in this honorable house, indicate the issue of pensions for parliamentarians after 2 terms. Mr. President, just also indicated that, Mr. Deputy President, he doesn't really want there to be a substantive discussion here. The fact of the matter is, some public servants, senior public servants, earn more than ministers. We don't want there to be a subject of discussion here neither, Mr. Deputy President. The fact of the matter is that parliamentarians have not received a salary increase in the past 23 years. We have not made that the subject of discussion here, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President. All that we have done is to work together with our partners, stakeholders, and the workers to come to a resolution on this matter. So I think it's important to note that we have not been selfish at all in this process. Mr. Deputy President, the issue of a right time and a wrong time to negotiate, I seem to be a very interesting one, and I sat here and I couldn't help smile to myself because, to my understanding, government didn't have no right time at all because we are always cornered, and we just heard through you, Mr. Deputy President, that the member representing the Labour signal that school is starting back very soon. So he's putting us on notice that there might be another wrong time for a right agreement. Again, Mr. Deputy President. So we are well aware, and we remain committed to the workers of this nation. We have given them our word that we are going to work tirelessly to resolve this matter. We have started with an initial initiative, and we believe with continued dialogue that we're going to get this done. And so I believe the pivotal matter in this is that we must do it in a responsible way. It must, and that is all that we are saying, Mr. Deputy President. We are not saying that we are going to back out or give any indication of mistrust. All we are saying is that it must be done responsibly. So whenever the discussions have been held, it must be held within the entire context of the country's ability, financial ability and capacity to deal with it. Mr. Deputy President, we can talk about all the different parameters, all the different analyses, how to approach it. All the workers want is they just want the money. They don't want to know how you're right. All they want is you call them and say, the pension is ready. That's all they want, Mr. Deputy President. And so we must continue to work hard to ensure that we resolve this matter and other matters. Because there are plenty of other matters that have been discussed, Mr. Deputy President. You, and I'm certain that you are aware of them. But the pensions take center stage. But government has always continued to be serious in these negotiations to resolve these matters. And the facts lay before us, Mr. Deputy President. The leader of government business spoke of $110 million was paid to our public servants over the past period. I think this is commendable. You know, and it shouldn't be just brushed aside as if, well, oh yeah, well, they get paid. It shouldn't be brushed aside like that. But it should be seen that we are making a serious commitment to ensuring that our workers are treated in the best way possible. Mr. Deputy President, thank you very much for your time on this matter.
Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. As I sat listening to the arguments on both sides, it came to bear the importance of timely submitting of documents to all parties involved in looking at issues like this. Because not being privy to being a part of any team negotiating, we need to understand what the subject is. And it is something that, having been in the House before, we toy with getting documents 2 days before you sit. It's not fair to who we represent, because we need to search and get information just like the others so that we can responsibly sit, as the President said this morning, in the highest institution in the land, to form a part so that we can take our responsibility as senators so that we can debate on the issue. But I'm trying to follow the trick, because I was only able to speak to one person once I got this document late last week. And I think we have to, and I want to be part of a system where we are more responsible and not just be seen here to rubber stamp things, because we are really representing people with voices. So we need to at least when the documents are being sent out to the lower house, we can get it as well. If there are changes, we are told so that we can do research into it, so that we'll be more effective. But having listened to the arguments, I also want to say that we need to have a contributory pension because we would not forever be able to sustain pensions. We also have to, Mr. President, we also have to look at when we are explaining things, we need to be precise. So, for example, in the beginning of the document, we're saying that these are all grants. My other question is, where are the grants coming from? Is it only from the National Transformation Fund? Am I reading it correctly? That is where it's coming from. But, you know, just saying all the capital things will come from grant funds, we need that explained as well. However, based on both arguments, I would say that we need to continue to negotiate in good faith, so that for the benefit of the country and the persons involved in serving the country, that a proper pension be established, whether it's contributory or not. I also want to clear the air on the pension for parliamentarians. Parliamentarians get pension after 2 terms, but there is a but. We don't hear about a but. You must be 55 to get it. Because I stopped at the parliament at age 50 and I had to wait till 55 to get the pension. So for the young ones who are 20, when you serve 2 terms, you're getting it at 55. So we need a lot of clarity in terms of pension and the way we roll it out, because people don't know there is a but. And we need to take out the but. Because if you're serving in the parliament and you're serving the people, your pension should be when you're finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I stand to give my full unwavering support to the motion that is before this honorable House. And to say upfront, I want to give commendation where commendation is due. And I may say it later again, but I want to commend the TUC for the vibrant negotiations with the government to bring us to this place where you can see benefits being paid to workers. And I don't know if you were commended before, but let it be said from this honorable House, we recognize how much you stand up, well, the team stood up for workers on a whole. And let it not be said, well, if it's been said, let us disprove it, that you guys did an exemplary work. For after 35 years, nobody was able to achieve what you have achieved in restoring pension to qualified workers. I mean, this is commendable. So, if you're getting pressure elsewhere, it's not the right pressure. You should be commended. But, Mr. President, I want to go as far as to say I want to commend the Ministry of Finance staff for the work they have been doing, and I want to express my commendation to them for the prudent stewardship of the country's finances. Not only do they work to conform to our macroeconomic indicators, simply put, they keep the accounts transparent, but most importantly, help the country to live within its means. Therefore, whenever there are any discussions as it relates to a financial liability to the state, the Ministry of Finance must be involved. They have to be involved. They are the custodians of the finances of this country. So if you have someone creating expenses and you don't know how you're going to take care of it, we may find ourselves back in the same boat prior to the Structural Adjustment Program, the homegrown Structural Adjustment Program, which we all work assiduously towards creating this environment we are enjoying today. We don't want to go back there at all. So let's look at what is before us, Mr. President. Prior to the Structural Adjustment Program, we had an economy that was busted, broke, a fiscal gap of $18 million, meaning we were spending monthly $18 million more than we were collecting revenues. Totally unsustainable. To pay salaries, you know that we had to sell state assets to do that. These examples that I've just cited is to remind us of a place where we came from, and we do not want to get back there. So we ought to ensure that we do it right going forward. We all contributed towards this, what we consider to be better times now. The government said very early that the financial plan that was followed is not sustainable, so we have to restructure. Work with our creditors, work with everybody. We got cussing and all this stuff and so on. But we had a plan. And the plan is to bring this economy back to a place where we all will be proud of. And to ensure that not only the workers get pension, the senior citizens get some benefit from it, but also our school children, school uniforms, school books, those who are sick, just name it, can benefit from the successes. So we have been able to do that and bring us to this place. Mr. President, I remember when the government said, if the fiscal space allows, we will do a number of things. Yes, talk about rebate to persons paying income tax. We talk about an increase for the senior citizens because they pay too, you know. When they purchase goods, VAT is on those goods, they pay something of the $200. So I said, if the fiscal space allows, we'll give them $100 more. Today we are happy because the fiscal space has allowed us to give them that $100. And over 3,404 families benefited from this $100 increase. I remember I heard one senior citizen on the radio saying, I'm asking the Prime Minister to give a $50 increase. Before it was said, and Prime Minister came in Parliament and said, $100, and I said, you get a double. But what is important here, Mr. President, everything in terms of spending at this point in time is governed by rules that we have passed, laws we have passed in this honorable house to ensure that we stay the course. So the fiscal responsibility legislation speaks to how we go forward in terms of spending. And the leader of government business said very early, if we have to spend monies as it relates to salaries or the case may be, it must fall between 2% of your last GDP. It can't go beyond that. But what is important? What does that mean really? We're saying, yes, we want to make sure that the people of this country benefit from everything, but it must fall within the legal parameters. We cannot go back where we came from. We cannot abandon the hard work that we have done to bring us to this place, that we can ask for more pension, more everything. A few years ago, we couldn't say that, you know. My dear brother, we couldn't ask for nothing. We were not even sure we were going to get what was legitimately ours. But now we are in a better place. And we're saying we want more. Of course, I agree with more. I put in my red today because I want to say I support more, but within the laws. It is important, Mr. President, also for us to recognize that with the increases that has been paid, everybody either contribute to it or will benefit from it. But it didn't come just by somebody saying, I want this. It was totally calculated with prudent management and to bring us to this place. When we say that I remember the question was asked, what is the national debt? And we were saying, national debt, that's not the question. The real question is, what is the GDP? Because when your debt to GDP ratio, when you bring this down, it frees up, you want to call it this way, more money in layman's term. Frees up more money, give you more space so you could do more things. So I remember all this confusion. We can't say the national debt and say the GDP. Why we have the space that we talk about, and the space that would have brought in those temporary nurses now onto the establishment, the space that would have given us the ability to pump $2.6 million more into buying new school books, the $1 million into getting the uniform for needy students, the over $1 million that is being pumped into the senior citizens, and just name it. The $110 million that was paid to employees, be it through back pay, increment increases. All this came about because of the fiscal space you created. So right now, we want to make sure that we continue to remain within the rules. But there's another key important point. And the key important point, Mr. President, is this. We have worked with our international partners, and they help us along the way to bring us to the space where we are at today. And the successes we are gaining today, be it by haircut, with our debts, be it by concessionary or grant funding that we're getting, Grenada making strides to help itself. So the taxpayers' money from elsewhere, they're free to give us. They feel obliged. They feel compelled to do it because why? Grenadians making a sacrifice for themselves. We cannot go back there, Mr. President. So with all that has been said, I agree for the more, but the more must be given within the laws and the rules that is established. And I look forward to continuing as we go along, because there's much more to be said. But I'm going to say, Mr. President, we are at, Prime Minister always say it, on a good wicket. So let's score runs, let's bat, and continue to promote this country. Because what we do today is not just for this present crop of people, but for future generations. So we must ensure that we lay a proper foundation that the entire country will be happy with. And I'm going to tell you, as a president, from all indication, they are happy. Thank you.
May it please you, Mr. President. I rise, Mr. President, in support of the motion advanced by the Leader of Government Business. Mr. President, I have listened with interest to the comments on both sides of the House. And the word which came to me most readily is the word balance, Mr. President. And while I empathize with my colleague Senator Lewis on the other side, it strikes me, Mr. President, that it is critically important for both sides to balance their respective interests. But to recall, as Senator Gawe has just made the point, that there are certain statutory limitations put in place to ensure that whatever we do at this stage, as he said, is sustainable, that it serves us not just in the present, but that it serves future generations as well. And I was heartened, as I listened as well, to note the tone on both sides and the commitment of both sides to continue to engage, to continue to speak. And being a new senator myself, I must say it was encouraging as well. So I have every expectation that the conversation will continue and that both sides will maintain and hopefully be able to achieve a balance that serves the interests of us all. I wanted to make a comment as well in relation to, and this is wearing my other hat now as a lawyer, as an attorney at law, to the additional allocations I noticed in the bill for the Supreme Court and for the Ministry of Legal Affairs. Because, Mr. President, it is no secret that in recent times the infrastructure of the court has come under strain. And it is no secret that it has caused lawyers and it has caused litigants considerable challenges. It is no secret that there are persons who have had the hearings of their matters delayed. And of course, there are the consequent